Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, good evening, everybody, rather. I'm so sorry. I mean, we have just a second. Yes, there you go. So, I mean, we have so far getting up. Just a second. I'm getting a feedback, so I must mute the YouTube channel. Yeah, there you are. Yeah, I mean, in my two previous lectures, we have dealt with a part of the rise of scientific method in social sciences. In the lecture 3, we'll continue to do that. Now, let us try to remember on what we have seen so far, just very briefly. In the lecture 1, we have seen what are the sources of knowledge, how the scientific knowledge and the unscientific, so-called unscientific knowledge can be differentiated. What is main thing, what are the main features of the scientific method and why we need scientific method, the 6 principles of scientific method that we have seen, and what are the scientific claims that we talk about, the observation, hypothesis, theory, law, all these things were actually discussed in the lecture 1. In the lecture 2, we have seen philosophy, which is basically lover of wisdom. Then we have also briefly introduced to ethics, the moral philosophy, epistemology, the theory of knowledge, metaphysics, to understand the real nature of knowledge, which is a very important aspect of philosophy, ontology, investigation of existence, what it takes to come into being, philosophy and sciences, how the philosophy and sciences are related, and what are the schisms between the philosophy and sciences, roads to enlightenment and enlightenment. These are the topics that we discussed in the lecture 2. Now, let me begin with a slide which I have presented at the very last of my last lecture, which is from the history of Western philosophy by Bertrand Russell. He talked about Copernicus, Brahe, Kepler, and Galileo, Galileo, and Newton. The men who founded modern science had two merits, which are not necessarily found together: immense patience in observation and great boldness in framing hypotheses. So all these things were there among these people who initiated the modern science, founder of modern science. And it was the triumph of Newtonian physics over Descartes' logic that really ushered into the modern era, modern science. Basically, this is the triumph of empiricism, that is observation, over a priorism, that is the things are innate in our mind. We actually don't see that much. Whatever we see, we relate with the reason. Without reason, observation is meaningless. So the triumph of empiricism over empiricism was very important. Now let me talk about the first modern philosopher in the history of philosophy, that is Rene Descartes. He is the first modern philosopher, and his observations or his philosophy had defining influences on science and social sciences. Descartes was contemporary to Galileo, first thinker to emphasize the use of reason to develop natural sciences. He, for the first time, said that if you want to see natural sciences, or if you want to actually develop natural sciences, you must use reason. That is a priorism. So rejected many of Aristotelian ideas, but agreed with Aristotle that knowledge should be based on first principles, that is philosophy. So our senses and mind can be easily deceived. It says, Descartes said, like Aristotle, that our senses and mind can be easily deceived. It must be discarded. He discarded every notion that is even the least bit suspicious to doubt. So I'll come back to this point. Every notion that if I doubt some notion, and if it doesn't prove, then reject the notion. I think something about an event or about a phenomenon. If I doubt that, and if it doesn't hold good against the doubt, hold firm against the doubt, then it must be discarded. So the famous Cartesian statement, doubt everything. Whatever you see, whatever you feel, doubt everything. In his discourse on the method, he said that this method is called hyperbolical or metaphysical doubt. This doubt is actually hyperbolical, and the method is called hyperbolical or metaphysical doubt. It is methodological skepticism that we talk about. It rejects any ideas that can be doubted, then reestablishes them in order to acquire a fine foundation for genuine knowledge. So here you are. the ideas that can be doubted, it must be rejected. And if you want to re-establish, you have to re-establish it with the firm foundation of genuine knowledge. So you doubt everything, and you time and again re-establish them on the foundation of genuine knowledge. That's Cartesian logic. That's Descartes. Science, I mean, I'll talk about it. This is the start of modernity, modern science. Many people were actually influenced by this, though he had a fundamental difference with Newtonian physics, which is based on empiricism, genuine observation. He was actually trying to put it on the foundation of genuine knowledge. So once he removed everything that he doubted, he is left with only one certainty, that he thought and therefore he must exist. If I don't think, then I don't exist. If I doubt anything about my existence, the fact remains that I doubt it, and because of my doubt, I exist. So this is the basic thing about Rene Descartes. I mean, he wanted to remove everything that he doubted, try to re-establish them in order to acquire a firm foundation for genuine knowledge. Then, after removing everything, is left with only one certainty, that you thought about any existence or your existence, therefore you exist. So, cogito ergo sum was the three words by Rene Descartes. It means, I think, therefore I am. The only existence of myself is in my thinking. If I can't think, I don't exist. If one is skeptical of existence, that is in and of itself proof that he does exist. Even if I am skeptical about my existence, that's the proof that we actually the person has existed. I have existed. He was the first modern philosopher that I said, and very importantly, he connected geometry with algebra. You can understand, the empiricists are mostly associated with geometry. And the rationalists, those who actually talk about the innate ideas and the precedence of innate ideas over the sensory experiences, though they are associated with algebra. And so far, this geometry and algebra didn't meet. Rene Descartes, for the first time in the history of philosophy, he connected geometry and algebra and solved geometry by algebraic equations. So you have the natural features, the several natural events, which is basically geometrical propositions. From Descartes, you started to solve these geometrical propositions or problems by algebraic equations. Here the two ends meet. Now, I blog today. The cogito ergo sum has transformed to this one. I blog, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. I blog, therefore I am. One thing I must mention here, the as far as we talk about postmodernity, we very seldom talk about modernity. The start of modernity has been a kind of handiwork of Rene Descartes. He started modernity. Just a second. Am I recording? Yeah, recording. Yeah. Just a second. So there, I mean, the modernity has been from Descartes. Modernity has started, and if you read Michel Foucault's Madness and Civilization, he said one very excellent. He made one very excellent comment, which is basically he said that, well, Descartes.
Sir, we can't see the
slide. You can't see the slide?
No, sir, we can't see the slide.
Oh, sorry.
We can see the YouTube, sir.
Oh, you can see the YouTube. Okay. Just a second. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir, it's visible now, sir.
Okay. So Foucault has said you can Descartes can doubt everything except himself. He said that a person who can think exists. What about a person who can't think? What about the so-called mad people? So if the mad people, or if the person who has some kind of mental derangement or mental disability, I mean, doesn't he exist? That's a very big question. I mean, it's very difficult to introduce these things in a short span of lecture. But well, you can think about it. I mean, Rene Descartes from Rene Descartes, the modernity started. There are many shortcomings of many Rene Descartes that we can talk about. But well, I'm presently associated with the development of scientific method in the social sciences. So it's not a kind of philosophical discourse that I'm engaged in, but well, I told you, I mean, you can see it in your off time, leisure time rather. So Francis Bacon, like Descartes, believed that scientific knowledge should be based on first principles. I mean, that is the philosophy. We must, first principles is basically reasoning, based on reason, genuine knowledge. Okay. So, but should happen through inductive logic. I talked about induction and deduction. Here, I'm again trying to introduce this. Induction means that observation of particular instances are used to generate general rules or explanations. I mean, as I said, that white swan rule. Europeans for a very long time saw white swans. So they thought the swans are white until they discovered the continent of Australia, they didn't know that swans can also be black. So this is a problem of first principles. So he actually tried to qualify the first principles with inductive method. But that is observation of particular instances to generate general rules or explanations. All knowledge, not just the first principles, should be obtained only through this inductive logic, generating explanations based on sensory experiences. I mean, sensory experiences is the primeval importance. So the induction is made through first principles is there, and you will have to if you want to make a general rule, then it should be based on sensory experiences. So he is known as father of empiricism, where empiric means relating to experience or observation. So there you are. I mean, Francis Bacon is the father of empiricism. Now, here you are, white swans. But well, can we really actually always depend on our experience or observation? Here you are. I often face this problem as Charlie is facing. So it's not always the experience that we talk about, that we can relate to, or we can actually depend on. The white swan rules and the problems of experiences. So David Hume took this empiricism to a new extreme, accepting only sensory data as a source of knowledge. Hume was not interested in taking or interested in accepting any other data, any data other than sensory data. So source of knowledge is only the sensory data, no first principles, no reason whatsoever. So true nature of reality consists only of the features of objects, not of the physical objects itself. I mean, but say for example, what makes cat a cat? Essence of cat, is it in feature? Its tails, its ears, its other features. So physical objects, the true nature of reality doesn't lie on the physical objects itself, but the features of that object is important. This is extreme form of empiricism, which is known as skepticism. Here you are. What makes this cat a cat? Essence of cat is in the features of this cat. So this is a very stringent or rather rigid position of empiricism, which is also called as skepticism. Hume also showed us the problem of induction. Even though you are consistently observe a phenomenon again and again, there is no guarantee your next observation will agree with the previous ones. If you say for example, you see white cats regularly, and you got you said that, well, the cats are white. You repeatedly saw a particular phenomenon, and you conclude something. But here you are, until you see the black cat, you are quite contented with the observation that cats are white. But when you see black cat, your induction has got a problem. So the problem of induction was actually pinpointed by David Hume. So according to David Hume, no amount of confirmatory observation can ever conclusively show that a scientific statement about the world is true. So if you require that all knowledge must be based on observations alone, that means you can never be sure you know anything. That's skepticism for you. Even repeated observation of an event cannot make it pertinent or make it a kind of general rule that this thing happens. This thing happens, you can say provisionally, say that cats are white. But if you see a black cat, you say that cats are both white and black. This is known as Hume's skepticism. Now, reaction to Hume's skepticism, German idealism developed from the cradle of Kantian transcendental idealism. I'll talk about Kant later. At the start of 19th century, idealists believed that we mentally construct reality. Reality doesn't exist outside. We mentally construct reality. Our experience of the world is a mental construction. Whatever we see is a mental construction. If you hold a different mental construction, you can observe a different world. Scientific inquiry should therefore focus on what we can know through our own reasoning. Reason is important. Whatever we see as Plato, from Plato's view, you can also remember that whatever you see can be known through our own reasoning. I mean, whatever you see, it can be a mirror or shadow reflection on the wall. It may not be the real thing. Real thing can also be found with your own reasoning. These idealists concerned themselves mainly with questions about immaterial things like self, God, substance, existence, causality. These were the subjects or these were the topics that they used to discuss. They used obscure and overly complicated language. And interestingly, this German idealism or idealists were both associated with Romanticism, German Romanticism. That was another trend, not really very important for our discussion on scientific method. But that's a very important trend, the philosophical trend in that's a very important trend in philosophy. And at the same time, they were also associated with the revolutionary politics of enlightenment. So they were actually associated with the revolution. This is German idealism for you. Now let us go to the issue of, or to the topic of, how modern science began. It all began with the Second Industrial Revolution. Beginning of modern science was actually synonymous with Second Industrial Revolution. Now, Second Industrial Revolution happened around the turn of 19th century. 1870 to 1940, before the start of the First World War. We have seen so many revolutions, so many inventions during the Second Industrial Revolution. You can see it. Whatever we see these days, except computer, have been developed during the Second Industrial Revolution. Now, immediately after the Second Industrial Revolution, there was a deep schism, deep difference of opinion between the philosophers and the scientists. Scientists disagreed on the metaphysics of the idealists. And with this industrial revolution, it was less and less relevant in a period when scientific, medical, technical advances were rapidly being made. So philosophers also tried to accommodate, or also tried to adjust the new situation arising out of the Second Industrial Revolution. These philosophers have two simultaneous trends at the very beginning. One is reconciliatory trend, represented by the pragmatists, or pragmatism, and another is reactionary trend against the philosopher metaphysics of the idealists, which is radical empiricism, represented by logical positivism, by Vienna Circle. Now let us talk about pragmatism. Classical pragmatists, Charles Sanders Peirce and William James, they all were classical pragmatists. They said a pragmatist can consider something to be true without needing to confirm that it is universally true. Say, for example, from observation, I have seen something. I will actually provisionally say that this is true. I don't have to make it sure whether is it universally true. Explanations contain laws from which descriptions of concrete events are logically derived. I mean, there are some explanations that contain laws from which description of concrete events that are logically. We actually, pragmatists actually derive different laws that are logically derived, and with that logically derived events, they try to explain certain laws without confirming whether it is universally true or not. Laws are formal theories that have been tested and not falsified. As I said earlier, that laws are, theories are laws in waiting. Hypotheses are theories in waiting. So laws are formal theories that have been tested and not falsified. Most philosophical topics science are all best viewed in terms of their practical uses and successes. The pragmatists actually stress on the practical use and their successes, where if it is practically useful and successful in that particular event or in that particular case, then, well, that is provisionally accepted as true. The nature of knowledge, language, concepts, meaning, beliefs, and science all come under this purview. All these topics are being viewed in terms of their practical uses and successes, not actually vigorously testifying universally. Now, let us give an example. If it rains every time your dog and cat fights, which is known as raining cats and dogs, and if people believe that when dogs and cats fight, it rains. I mean, we said raining cats and dogs. So cats and dogs, when the cats and dogs fight, it rains. So can there be any logical conclusion? Can there be any association with the fighting of dogs, cats and dogs and rain? Well, if people say that there is a causal relation between cats and dogs fighting and rain, then there are causal relations. This is pragmatism, and they say this is it's pragmatically true. So here you can see that if cats and dogs fight and it rains every time, you see, then well, you can relate the theory that when cats and dogs fight, it rains. This is pragmatically true, as every prudent husband does it. I mean, there is no point in arguing the fact whether it's universally true or not. Second generation pragmatists were John Dewey and Jane Addams. I must mention Jane Addams was a Nobel laureate for her invention of social work. They talked about politics, education, and other dimensions of social improvement. Then we have George Herbert Mead developing pragmatist perspectives upon the relations between the self and the community. Pragmatism's influence was challenged as analytic philosophy blossomed and become the dominant methodological orientation. Of course, I mean, the pragmatic philosophy was challenged. We have analytic philosophy at the on the other end. So on the face of that challenge, a transitional third generation pragmatism developed by C.I. Lewis and W.V.O. Quinn. It is known as naturalism. It says there is no first philosophy, no autonomous philosophical perspective over and above science itself. That's a huge change from the traditional pragmatists. So in this naturalism, they don't accept anything which is over and above science. Huge change that we see in pragmatism. The norms of scientific research cannot be established from outside science. So you cannot really say that we will control science or norms of scientific research from outside scientific field. So philosophy cannot really tell us what would scientific research method will be. That's pragmatism for you. That's third generation pragmatism for you. So the question of naturalism versus relativism came up, and in this debate, these pragmatists hold the pole of naturalism. Then the famous Vienna Circle, which came after, or rather during the second industrial revolution. After the First World War, a group of mathematicians and scientists and philosophers formed the Wiener Kreis, that is Vienna Circle, unhappy with the metaphysics of German idealists that I told about, who focused on first principles of knowledge and the fundamental nature of beings. They felt idealist questions about the self and existence were meaningless because they are unanswerable. So, idealist questions about self and existence, meaningless because it's not unanswerable, it's not observable. What is self? How self is associated with existence? Meaningless. These are the people who are known as logical positivists. So the new philosophy called logical positivism arrived. They redefined science as the study of meaningful statements about the world. For a statement to be meaningful, it has to be verifiable, which is known as verification criterion. This is very important among the logical positivists. It should be possible to determine the truth of a statement. If you don't verify the truth of a statement, then it's meaningless. So, meaningful statement, study of meaningful statement, and verification criteria. These are the two prominent features of logical positivism. And there are two types of meaningful statement. One analytic statement, another synthetic statements. I'll talk about this later. Here you are. Everything that we get is from this 5 senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. No other way you can get your knowledge. And it must be based on meaningful statements, and it must be verified. The truth of the statement must be verified. So, analytic statements. Analytic statements are tautological, necessarily true. Bachelors are unmarried. All squares have 4 sides. So they are a priori statement, what we call a priori statement, like definitions and purely logical. And you cannot refute these things. They don't depend on the state of the world and therefore don't require observation to be verified. I mean, you can't or you don't have to verify these statements whether bachelors are unmarried or all squares have 4 sides. I mean, this cannot be, this shouldn't be, there is no need to be verified. They can be used in mathematics and logic. This a priori statement can be used in mathematics and logic because, say for example, any mathematical statement is analytical statement. Any logical statement is analytical statement. We talk about height of a mountain. That's math. We can measure it. We can measure it. The height of a mountain. So here we get a tautological statement, which is based on the fact, and you don't have to verify these facts. And you cannot really refute these statements. So new combinations of analytic statements can be verified with formal logics. I mean, if you want to make a logical syllogism with this, say for example, bachelors are unmarried, then you can give some analytic statements, and it must be verified by formal logic. Synthetic statement, on the other hand, depend on the state of the world. Analytic statements don't depend on the state of the world. It's true here, it's true in Sierra Leone, it's true in America, it's true in Antarctic, it's true in Arctic. But here, all bachelors are happy, all cats are born with tails. These are synthetic statements. The statements are a posteriori. They can only be verified through observation. Whether all bachelor students are happy or not, whether all cats are born with tails or not, can be verified through observation. These statements should be always publicly accessible, and it must be verified, I mean, over and over again. But the problem lies on the unobservables. What about the unobservables? We don't see these things. Here the structure of an atom, say. We don't see these things. How can we verify it? So, Vienna Circle said that no statement of unobservable entities like electron, gravity, or depression, because they can't be observed directly. We can't observe electron, gravity, or depression. If statement makes reference to an unobservable entity, is not tautological or logically empirically verifiable, then that statement is meaningless. So if we make statement on unobservable entity which we can't verify or we can't observe, then that statement is very meaningless. So there is no such thing as atom, there is no such thing as gravity, there is no such thing as depression for that matter. Subjects like metaphysics, theology, and ethics were excluded from science. These logical positivists did this thing. Metaphysics, theology, ethics are excluded because those things are unobservable. So criterion of verification through observation could not deal with the problem of induction. I mean, the problem of induction is a separate thing. If you can't deal with the problem of induction, then you have a very poor survival chance. No amount of confirmatory evidence is ever enough to definitely prove or verify a statement. It's always possible a contradictory observation will be found in the future. So where we will actually step? Shall we continue to observe things and provisionally hold the things true until contradictory evidence comes? So the strong criteria of verification was weakened by requiring only confirmation instead of verification. We need, say for example, when verification, the criterion of verification needs confirmation instead of verification. This strong criterion has been weakened. I mean, we always need confirmation. We don't need verification. Not allowing references to unobservable entities created big problems. So there is no such thing as gravity, or maybe depression, or atom, electron. No, electron, gravity, depression cannot be observed directly. But they are indispensable in scientific explanations these days. So Vienna circle can't explain these things. This, together with the problem of induction, led to a more moderate version of logical positivism known as logical empiricism. It is more flexible and tolerant towards atomic theory and induction. Hypotheses and theories must be empirically testable, was retained. I mean, with logical positivism, you don't really have any other things, so for that matter, any universally holdable theory or hypothesis. Here, logical empiricists actually said that hypothesis theories must be empirically testable, which should be retained. Now here you are, the differences between positivism and pragmatism. Positivism assumes a scientific method. Pragmatism takes a problem-solving approach. Presupposes external reality, views reality as fluid, somewhat indeterminate. Positivism assumes an unbiased observer. Pragmatism assumes a situated and embodied producer of knowledge. Positivism assumes discovery of abstract generalities. I mean, they actually try to discover abstract generalities based on observation, empiricism. Pragmatism assumes a search of multiple perspectives, which may be pragmatically true. Positivism aims to explain empirical phenomena. Pragmatism aims to study people's action to solve emergent problems. So, say for example, if a person is depressed, logical positivists will say that there is no such thing as depression. But pragmatism says that, well, you may be depressed. So let us solve your problem. Positivism views facts and values as separable. Here, pragmatism sees facts and values as co-constructive. We sometimes co-construct, or we sometimes mix facts with values and come to the conclusion about the world around us. Then we come to a point of post-positivism. It's a big thing. That broke the shackle of positivism. First person that I would like to discuss is Karl Popper. Karl Popper was one of the most vehement critics of Vienna Circle. It's a distinction between meaningful and meaningless statements that should be based on criterion of falsification, not verification. As I said in the first lecture, hypothesis should be falsifiable. Here, Popper, the falsification of Popper, was the first major groundbreaking work in philosophy that ushered to a different approach. So here you are, the distinction between meaningful and meaningless statement should be based on criteria of falsification, whether it holds true in all the situations or in particular situations. We don't need verification. We should never conclusively verify or prove a statement with observations, but we can conclusively disprove it with contradictory evidences. That's falsification. I mean, we can never verify or prove a statement with observations. There can be endless observations, but we can conclusively disprove it with contradictory evidences. Say, for example, if you say the cats are white, we'll try to, we don't really go for seeing, we really don't go on observing innumerable innumerable white cats to prove that cats are white or disprove cats are white. We will only try to find non-white cats to falsify, to disprove. So this is the contradictory evidence that we talk about. We don't need verification. Verification is a very cumbersome, is a very endless process. We need falsification. A statement is meaningful only if it is falsifiable. I mean, that's a very big thing. Say, for example, God created world. Well, this statement is not falsifiable. So, according to Popper, it's not meaningful. We need falsifiable statements, meaningful statements which are falsifiable. Popper proposes that scientists should actively engage in risky experiments to make their theories falsifiable. Here I said on the black cat and the white cat. So they need to find the black cats to disprove that the cats are white. I mean, I'm giving a very non-risky experiments. The scientists should actively engage in these risky experiments of falsification. There are experiments that maximize the chance of finding evidence that contradicts our hypothesis, and we need to find those evidences which can contradict our hypothesis. That's the scientific exercise. If we find such contradictory evidence, we inspect it for clues how to improve our hypothesis. In this case, we must say the colors of cat range from white to black. Well, what about brown cats? We'll find out brown cats then. We always want to, or we always need to falsify, run the process of falsification to improve our hypothesis. The hypothesis is provisionally supported if contradictory evidence is absent. That's important, and that's a very important observation of Karl Popper. The hypothesis is provisionally supported, only contradictory evidence is present, and the famous theory of knowledge through trial and error by Karl Popper says that we need continuous trial and error to prove or disprove or prove or disprove a particular hypothesis. Here you are, all bread nourishes. That's a hypothesis. But what about a particularly fake French village? All bread nourishes except the bread produced in this particular fake French village. So that's falsification. We came up with contradictory evidence. Not all breads nourishes. There is a substantial number of breads which don't nourish, particularly from this fake French village. So we need to go through this trial and error process continuously. Then I would like to discuss Thomas Kuhn, where science doesn't develop out of strict application of either the verification or falsification statement. He said that, well, neither verification nor falsification is enough. Hypotheses aren't immediately rejected or revised if the data don't agree with them. You can't really immediately reject a hypothesis if the data don't agree with them. Instead, science takes place within a certain framework or paradigm. Hypotheses are generated that fit within this paradigm. Unexpected results lead to the revision of hypothesis, but only as long as they fit the framework. If this is impossible, the results are just ignored. So, say for example, the gravitational laws. If some people show us, say for example, a magician shows us the anti-gravitational tricks. Shall we consider the law of gravitation is false? No. The law of gravitation took place within a certain framework or paradigm. If the results is different from the, or shows a different thing from the laws or theories, it should be seen whether it actually complied to that paradigm. If it complied to that paradigm, then we can revise our hypothesis. If it didn't, then the results can just be ignored as a kind of exception. But when more contradictory evidences accumulates, a crisis occurs, which leads to a paradigm shift. So one group of results or one result doesn't make a theory false or faulty. More contradictory evidences and the accumulation thereof and the crisis resulted from that contradictory evidences leads to a paradigm shift, change in the paradigms. And this paradigm shift, actually, a new paradigm is adopted, as well as a new hypothesis or theory, and this cycle begins again. So verification or falsification is not only the two criteria that the scientist should based on, they should also based on paradigm, the concept of paradigm by Thomas Kuhn. Here you are, the pre-science, then we have normal science, then the model drift, then the model crisis, as I said. Drift, the drift is actually different results, accumulation of different results. Then we have crisis. Then the resolution comes with the paradigm change and the normal science comes back. This cycle will continue. This is the Kuhn cycle. Then we must talk about Lakatos. Very few people talk about Lakatos, but Lakatos' view actually lies in between Popper and Kuhn. He replaced Kuhn's concept of the scientific paradigm with his own concept of progressive research program. Scientific paradigm is replaced by progressive research program. In science, a theory is really a succession of slightly different theories. And experimental techniques developed over time that all share a common hard code. Such a collection named as research program. So here you are, I mean, science, a theory is a succession of slightly different theories and experimental theories. I mean, a theory is actually refined with the throughout the history with different theories and experimental techniques. And these different theories, these experimental techniques make a common hardcore. all share a common heart core, which is known as research program. Scientists working within a given research program shield the core from falsification with a protective belt of auxiliary hypothesis. So a theory does have a kind of buffer of protection belt of auxiliary hypothesis. Now here you are. The cycle, the circle, the Lakatos circle. At the very outer cycle, you can find data. Then we have the buffer zone, the auxiliary theories. And then the fundamental theories, the inner core principles. So to change the inner core principles, you need to start from the data level. You need to accumulate the data, contradictory data rather. Then you try to penetrate the auxiliary theories. And after penetrating the auxiliary theories, you will go to the fundamental theories and change that fundamental theories. Okay, so that's really a kind of, it's not one-way process, it's two-way processes. But it's difficult to change an inner core theory, heart core principles. If you want to do that, you need a huge database and then penetrate first the auxiliary theories, then the fundamental theories. The question of whether a worldview is true or false is whether a research is progressive or degenerative. Progressive research program is characterized by growth, prediction of novel facts, and more precise predictions, etc. Degenerative program is marked by a lack of growth. Its auxiliary belt does not lead to novel prediction that are later verified. So if the program, research program is progressive with this characters like growth prediction of novel facts or precise predictions, then you can always have a kind of situation where you have the progressive research programs. So worldview is true or false. Whether is worldview true or false is the question of whether a worldview is true or false is replaced by the question of whether the research program is progressive or degenerative. Idea of research program leads to a more nuanced position of purpose falsification, falsifiability. Instead of theories being summarily rejected at first conflict with observation, science is now seen to proceed by continually adjusting and developing the protective belt around the heart core of a research program. You can remember the circle rather. Heart core research program has been protected by the auxiliary theories, and we don't really reject the theories at the very outset. It must have been penetrated phase by phase, layers by layers, from data to auxiliary theories, then hardcore theories. And well, in this way, the theory becomes a part of the progressive research program. Positivism and post-positivism. Ontologically, positivism is realist, post-positivism is critical realist. Epistemologically, positivism is dualist, objectivist. Post-positivism is modified, objectivist, subjectively acknowledged. Methodologically, positivism tells us experimental criticism. Post-positivism deals with critical multiplicity. That's important. I mean, we only in positivism, that's the key area of this breaking the shackle. The Experimental empiricism was the methodology of the positivists. Here, you can really have both verification, falsification, and progressive research program. Critical multiplism that we talk about. We also talk about hypothetical deductive method. It combines induction and deduction, requiring falsification and accepting repeated confirmation only as provisional support for a hypothesis. So here you are, it is known as constructive empiricism. It is a balance between the empiricism and post-positivism. It's true. It combines both induction and deduction, and then we need falsification and repeated confirmation after you took it as a provisional hypothesis. Constructive empiricism, another very important field in the important area in the field of science. Bas van Frazen. Science aims to produce empirically adequate theories. Knowledge requires observation, but unobservable entities are allowed. Here, they are not hardcore empiricists. They said that unobservable entities are allowed. Accepting a scientific theory doesn't mean accepting it as definite, a true representation of the world. So if I accept a scientific theory, this doesn't mean that it actually reflects a true representation of the world. A scientific statement is accepted as true as far as our observation go. Beyond that observation, we provisionally accept a scientific theory, but this doesn't mean that it is a. This may not mean it's a true representation of the world. Whether the statement truthfully represents unobservable entities simply cannot be determined. So unobservable entities, whether it actually truthfully represents unobservable entities, we can't simply determine that. We just have a current best explanation for our observation until we get the other observations, contradictory evidence. So we take it as a provisional hypothesis. And as far as unobservables are concerned, well, if it holds good in the scientific measurement or in the scientific scientific field, then well, it's provisionally accepted. Truth or false, as far as unobservables are concerned, simply cannot be determined. Say, for example, we are observing a shift of our magnetic field, Earth's magnetic field. The constructive empiricism says that, well, it's a shift that is unobservable. We cannot simply say that it is true. But if you actually make us see, or if you present something which is a clinching evidence of the shift of magnetic field, then we will accept that. That's constructive empiricism for you. I will briefly dwell on the Annals school, Lucien Fabre and Marc Bloch. Then it was the main architect of Annals school. They were initiators. The architect of Annals school was Ferdinand Braudel. It emanates from it is originated from the journal Annals, Economies, Societés and Civilizations. They for the first time advocated a new form of history, which is not the study of leaders, not the study of kings, queens. It's a study of the lives of ordinary people. Minimum emphasis on politics, diplomacy, and wars. They inquire about climate, demography, agriculture, commerce, technology, transportation, and communication, as well as social groups and mentalities. They aimed at total history, what we these days we call social history. They yielded dazzling micro-studies of villages and regions, but well, and at the same time, international influence on history on this historiography has been enormous. This is a graph that I took it from the website. It's a graph through space and time. You can see, I mean, here the tribe scale, that is the community scale, and the inter-tribe, that is the above, that covers above tribes. I mean, that's more than tribe, more than a few tribes, or more than few communities. And actually, a regional event. Then this is the economic world on the left side. On the ground axis, you can find short-term events, 1 year less, 1 year or less, mid-term event. Here we can conjecture about economic life and cultural life, which is 1 to 10 to 50 years, and long-term event, there is environment, geography and climate, more than 100 years ago, more than 100 years time span. During that time, the arrival of annals school during that time is very important. Why I discussed annals school here is that it's very important. They're excellent. I mean, what should I say? They're cut above. I mean, they are so much ahead of time that created a separate discipline within, or that borderlines with science, with social science, is history. History actually started to take form as a discipline with annals school. We'll talk about in our next lecture series also. Now we'll briefly, we'll discuss few epistemological questions. That is a study of the theory of knowledge. We have two important philosophical questions about knowledge. The first question concerns the nature of reality. What is real? What exists? Therefore, what is out there that we can gain knowledge of in the first place? That's the nature of reality, the first question. Second question is ontological question, the study of being. The second question concerns the way in which the knowledge can be acquired. Assuming there is a reality out there that is in principle knowable, then what knowledge of reality is accessible to us, and how do we access it? I mean, what kind of knowledge is accessible to us and how we know it? That's ontological question that will show us how the different philosophical trend interacted with science. The first thing first, second thing first, we'll discuss the acquiring knowledge aspect first. Now, in the acquiring of knowledge, we have rationalist. Knowledge is gained through reason. These nationalists say that knowledge is gained through reason. We can deduce truths about the world without having to resort to experience. We don't need any experience. We can deduce truth about the world without having an sensory experience rather. Philosophy of Plato, Descartes, structure of nature are innate. We are born with it. We are born with our reasoning, and we can deduce truth. We can know truth without resort to experience. We already know them. It's only the reasoning that you will have to develop. We already know the truth. It's only the reason that we want to develop. We are born with the structure of nature. We just have to remember or recognize them by using our reason. So there you are. Primary ways that we know is not these five senses, it's within our head, that is innate. Now the rival group is empiricist. Sensory experience is the most important way to obtain knowledge about the world. Aristotle was the first empiricist. Fundamental truths about nature come from sensory experience. We can obtain more knowledge through deductive reasoning, but observation is the basis of all our knowledge. The only basis of knowledge is observation. We know with deductive reason, but all deductive reasonings should be based on observation. Knowledge is not innate. As Aristotle said, it's tabula rasa, the blank slate that we are born with. After our birth, the experiences, the empirical experiences create knowledges on that blank slate. Galileo was moderate empiricist. His emphasis was on observation and experimentation. He also talked about logical reasoning. Without logical reasoning, he could not deduce the fact that whether Earth moves around the sun or the sun moves around the Earth. He included unobservable in his hypothesis. The hardcore empiricists don't agree that the unobservables should be included in the hypothesis. So here you are, empiricism. All our knowledge comes through the use of five senses. A belief is a basic empirical belief if and only if it is a direct result of sensation. I seem to see a tree. So that's a direct direct result of sensation. But the thing is that both have its own fault. First thing is that rationalism doesn't always, almost does never conform with science. I mean, there are so many things in science that cannot be explained in rationalism, through rationalism. Empiricism also have got many problems. Here you are, the guy is out for fishing, and well, both this shark and the guy are thinking that they have got the dinner. And who had got the dinner at the end is a very big question. So empiricism can lead to this kind of dilemma, or this kind of sticky field that you are where you are stuck maybe forever. These are the rationalists and these are the empiricists. Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Berkeley, Hume. I don't want to discuss all of them. I have selectively discussed some of them because my primary emphasis is not philosophy. It's only the part of philosophy that is associated with science. Now with this kind of catch-22 situation, where we will go between the empiricists and the rationalists. This figure, or this guy, this person came as a rescuer, Kant. Kant, with Kant, we call that Enlightenment as European man's coming of age. Newton's synthesis of the astronomy of Copernicus and Kepler. Terrestrial mechanics of Galileo. No one, including God, has a privileged position. That's the beginning of Kant. No one, including God, has a privileged position. He wrote Critique of Pure Reason, groundwork of metaphysics of morals, Critique of Practical Reason, Critique of Judgment. Both, according to Kant, both laws of nature and laws of morality are generated in human reason itself. So, laws of nature and laws of morality, both are within the nature, human reason itself. Two incommensurable realms, nature and freedom, are there. The realm of what is and that of what ought to be, ought to be. The former of which must be limited to leave adequate room for the later. So he said that, well, two incommensurable, nature, they don't always fit with each other. Nature and freedom. Now the realm of what? First is that realm of, nature is realm of, nature means the realm of what is. And freedom is what ought to be. Nature is, the nature's realm is what is, and freedom means what ought to be. And the first must have ingredients of the second. So he actually liberated the philosophical rationals from the strict confines of nature or innate ideas. He combined these two things. Nature and freedom, he combined these two things. The what is there, what is there out in the nature, and what ought to be. What ought to be is freedom, what is nature. Twofold classification of judgments according to Kant, analytic or synthetic, and either a priori or a posteriori. I'll talk about this checkerboard little later, but I just presented here. You can actually build a checkerboard with this Kantian logic, analytic, synthetic, a priori or a posteriori. Now, what is synthetic logic? Analytic logic. Analytic is its negation results in logical absurdity. A father is male, a green thing is colored. So you can't really negate this thing. That is analytic logic. You can't negate, if you negate this thing, you launch into a logical absurdity. Nobody can deny that a father is male or green is colored, except if he or she is colorblind. Then mere analysis of the terms in which they are formulated. It's a mere analysis of the terms in which it's formulated. Analytic logic, it's a mere analysis. The logic, the premise itself is what is quite self-evident. Synthetic logic, on the other hand, judgments, or synthetic judgments about empirical matters, in fact, in particular, those stating empirical laws of nature. Copper conducts electricity. You need to prove that. You won't have to prove whether father is male or green is colored. But here, you need to prove that. And such judgments, whether true or false, can always be denied without contradiction. Now here you are, the a priori concept and a posteriori concept. A priori concept independent of all experience and even of all impression of the senses. So independent of all experience and even all impressions of the senses. Thus, man has an immortal soul. That's once again, you can neither confirm nor falsify it by experience whether man has an immortal soul, independent of all experience and even all impressions of the senses. With all experience and all impression of the senses, you can neither confirm or nor falsify that whether man has an immortal soul or not. Analytic judgment are a priori. As I said earlier, analytic judgment, these are a priori. Their truth and indeed their logical necessity can be made evident by mere analysis of their terms without resort to experiment or observation. You don't have to experiment or observe whether a man has an immortal soul. So this is at the same time a priori and analytic. It's unique and distinctive of the critical philosophy. Here we are coming to the phase of critical philosophy. Kant gave rise to critical philosophy. So this is a priori as well as analytic judgment, and here a posteriori concept, which are abstracted from sense perception and applicable to it. Green is abstracted from perpetual data and applied to them when we judge that something is green. We know what is green. There is a perpetual data, and we applied that to judge whether something is green or not. It is similar to traditional empiricism. So one is leading to critical philosophy, another is actually continuation of traditional empiricism. So there are three classes of judgments: mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive, analytic a priori, synthetic or posterior, synthetic a posteriori, and synthetic a priori. So these are mutually exclusive and exhaustive. You can see here, just a second, let me annotate for where is the pen? Draw. Here you are. Here, this is a priori and this is a posteriori. Now, this a priori, this is analytic a priori. Analytic a priori is exclusive and jointly exhaustive. Synthetic a posteriori is once again exclusive and jointly exhaustive, and synthetic a priori is exclusive and jointly exhaustive. Now we have, in the checkerboard we have analytic a priori. Triangles have three sides, certain but dull and tautological. Analytic a posteriori, none and nothing, no truths derived from experiences are tautological. Like man has immortal soul, or green, sorry, not the earlier example. The green, now greenness of green has been got or has been achieved through the perpetual data. Now synthetic a priori is actually certain but also useful. It's mathematical knowledge. And synthetic a posteriori, triangle earliest discovered geometrical shapes. So it's handy enough handy. It could not, but it could be wrong. I mean, after invention, it becomes a posteriori. So these are the judgments of Kant. Just a second. Oh. I need to, oh, okay. Somebody else wrapped it for me. Well, we call Kant's philosophy as transcendental idealism. Human self or transcendental ego, Meghna Kaur. She has scribbled on my screen. Okay. The human self and transcendental ego construct knowledge out of sense impressions and from universal concepts called categories that it imposes upon them. That is transcendental idealism. I'll talk about it in a more explanatory way. Ideas, the raw matters of knowledge, is due to realities existing independently of human minds, but such things in themselves must remain forever unknown. And human knowledge cannot reach to them because knowledge can only arise in the course of synthesizing the ideas of sense. This is transcendental idealism for you. Human self or transcendental ego that Kant has described construct knowledge out of sense impressions and from universal concepts, both. I mean, we sense, we get the knowledge, construct the knowledge with the sensory impressions from the sensory experiences, and from universal concepts called categories that imposes upon them. Now, ideas, which are the raw materials of knowledge, is due to realities existing independently of human minds. So the realities exist independently of human minds. That is ideas. But such things in themselves must remain forever unknown. That's important. I mean, these ideas, the raw material of knowledge, can remain unknown. I mean, you come up with, you're born with some innate knowledge, which sometimes remain unknown. Human knowledge cannot reach to them because knowledge can only arise in the course of synthesizing ideas of sense. So you can actually transcend. I mean, you can actually transcend that phase, but your knowledge cannot reach to these ideas or raw materials of knowledge, the things in themselves. Things in themselves are not tangible with your sensory experiences. So, things in themselves here, world of appearance of the phenomenon world. Things in themselves will forever remain with you, but you cannot really get hold of that. You can have world of appearances of the phenomenon world with your sensory experiences as well as universal concepts. But things in themselves will elude you. The huge influence, unprecedented influence of Kant is here. I'm not going to explain all this. Here you have the Marx Engels, Adorno, Horkheimer, Badiou, Foucault, Derrida, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Socrates, Plato, and from Socrates, Plato dialectic, Kant appeared. Oh, he gave rise to so many philosophical trends. Now, acquiring knowledge through our sensory experiences went to as far as Bacon and Hume and the logical positivists, which were strict empiricists. Only sensory experience could lead to the knowledge about the world. Statements about unobservable universal properties that cannot be observed directly be meaningless. So the love is not unobservable and of course meaningless, which it cannot be observed directly. Constructive and empiricism, I've talked about it. The role of sensory experience in both inductive and deductive method allows hypothetical terms that don't have physical, directly observable counterparts. Knowledge is provisional because it always remains possible that new contradictory evidence be found someday. So whether new contradictory evidence can be found here or not, it's a very big question. Constructive empiricism says it can. Now the ontology, the study of being, which asks, what is the nature of our reality? Two main points: whether the reality exists independently of human thought. When we refer to objects we perceive in the world, are we referring to actual entities that exist outside of us? When we actually say something, we actually refer, whether we refer the actual entities that exist outside us, or are we referring to mental representations that are constructed by our mind and that can only be said to exist in our mind? When we say that Taj Mahal exists, say for example, Vijayanagara exists, whether it exists independently of our mind, when we actually refer that it exists, whether we are referring to actual entities that exist outside us, Vijayanagara is not we're not in front of or in the midst of Vijayanagara. But whether we are referring to the actual Vijayanagara that exists outside us, or whether we are referring to mental representation of Vijayanagara that are constructed by our mind through photos or maybe field sites, and that can only be said to exist in our mind. We have impression and then we are expressing it. That's a big question. So the study of being, which asks, what is the nature of reality? It boils down to 2 points, 2 main points: particulars and universals. With particulars, we mean specific instances or occurrences in which a property can be observed. With universals or unobservables, we mean general properties that cannot be observed directly. So love or gravity, particular instances of universal property. So in particulars, we have specific instances of occurrences in which a property can be observed. Well, a property can be observed in any observation. Universal, which is non-observable, here love is unobservable. Whether we can derive love with the particular instances of universal property, I think yes. Then the epic battle between idealism and materialism. Idealism says reality, but there's mental or material, which comes first. Reality as we perceive it exists entirely in our mind. The existence of an external or physical world is irrelevant. It's entirely in our mind. The physical world doesn't exist. Our perception of it is determined by our mental processes. So whatever we perceive are determined by our mental processes. Physical world doesn't exist. reality in effect, a mental construct. Gravity and love exist, but only in our mind. The same goes for their particular occurrences. The expression of love is only in our mind. So here you are, the reality in effect, a mental construct. Materialism, on the other hand, argues or accepts an external world independent of our mind. Even if our mind doesn't go to that extent, it exists. Everything in this independent physical world, physical reality, consists entirely of matter. So the matter comes first. Everything as a result of the interaction of physical stuff, including our consciousness, feelings, and thought. So a consciousness, feeling, a thought is the interaction of physical stuff. We fell in love with the charm of beauty, or maybe something else. So it's the beauty, beauty has its own features. So it's the interaction of physical stuff with which we build our consciousness, feelings, and thoughts. Byproducts of our brain interacting with physical world is important. Our feelings, consciousness, thoughts are byproducts of our brain interacting with physical world, not strongly associated with a view on the distinction between universal and particulars. They are not strongly associated with universals or particulars. Here you are, the different life events, different events in our life as perceived by the materialist and idealist. Dreams, as far as the materialists are concerned, it's nonsense side effects of consciousness. Idealists said that it less filtered consciousness. Survival, the sole purpose of consciousness, one of the, as far as the materialists are concerned, idealists said one of the many challenges of consciousness, survival. Illusions, as materialists said, evidence that consciousness is flawed. Idealists said the evidence that layers of experience conflict. So that's the illusion for idealist. Reality, unconscious physical mechanics. Idealists, materialists said unconscious physical mechanics. Consciousness, conscious perceptual participation, as far as idealists are concerned. Qualia, it's a clever tricks of mind. According to idealists, it's the cosmological foundation. Physics, as far as materialists are concerned, the cosmological foundation. According to idealists, physics is nested layering of consciousness. Science, as far as idealists, materialists are concerned, logical facts that predict reality. Idealists say it's the consciousness formalizing understanding. Now, the debate between the realism and realism, that is the debate within realism rather. Just like materialists, realists maintain that external reality exists independent of human thought. It exists. Whether we think or not, it exists. But realists also maintain that universals like love and gravity are real. Materialists may say that it's an illusion of mind, but maybe expression of particulars on the universal, but it's real, according to the realists. In what form these exist depends on your flavor of realism. So here you are, the reality. Now, it all comes to the senses. It goes to mind, then thoughts, memories, ideas, desires, etc. It reaches to reality. Then from reality, it has a two-way process. Properties we can sense, such as light and sound. It again goes back to senses, and from senses it can form a reality. So from senses, reality can take the root of mind, and through mind it can go to reality. In mind it is a kind of cooked with thoughts, memories, ideas, desires, and from senses it directly goes to reality, may go to reality. Properties can sense, such as light, sound, etc. Now, two kinds of reality that I will talk about. There are various forms of reality. One is Platonic reality, refers to the Plato's position that universes like gravity, love really exist independently of our observation, but on a separate abstract plane. We can feel that. We cannot really observe that independent of our observation. So love exists in an abstract plane. I don't know whether the other person loves me or not, but it's a Platonic love in the abstract plane. Maybe both loves each other, but there is no expression, no observable expression. That is Platonic love for you. A more moderate forms of realism is scientific realism. It's possible to make consistently supported claims using universes in statements about observable phenomena. So we actually can state about some observable phenomena by consistently supporting claims using universes like love. Universes like love, gravity are given the same ontological status as observable particulars. So it's same ontological status, same existence status as love or gravity, universes. So it exists. Unobservables are assumed to exist since they are useful and often even necessary to formulate successful scientific claims. So they don't discard unobservable. They say that unobservables exist. Unobservable exist. And it exists because it is useful and it's often necessary to formulate successful scientific claims. So without the existence, without the concession of existence of atom, you cannot really make other scientific observations. So scientific realism says that. But in contrast to Platonic love, it's the romantic love, which is some expression that is there in scientific realism. There is no such thing as an abstract plane for scientific realism. Now, last topic is nominalism. Very briefly, I would say that it opposes realism as far as universes are concerned, accepts reality as independent of human thought, but denies the existence of universes. So it opposes realism as far as universes. You cannot really make a universal claim that these things will lead to love or these things will lead to gravity. So it accepts reality independent of human thought, but you cannot make a universal claim. It denies the existence of universes. No such thing as gravity. There are only falling objects. No such thing as love. There are some expressions which akin to love. We just use the term gravity because they help us to make sense of the world, but these universes don't actually exist. So whenever we see a falling object, we need to explain why the objects fall. We explain it in terms of a scientific law, or in terms of a law, but there is no such thing as gravity. The Objects fall from up to down. That's nominalism. We feel we are nominal. They say we are nominal. We only explain those things which we see. Whatever we don't see, we don't explain. We don't have to explain. We don't see gravity, do we? So we don't have to explain that. So finally, the social science is born. Social science has its beginning from this launch pad. We'll discuss it in a separate lecture series, how social science born, how was the social science born, how we see the beginning of the social science. Now, well, after all this exercise, let's sum up very briefly. Descartes, Bacon, Hume, and German idealism that we discussed here, pragmatism and logical positivism. We also discussed rationalism and empiricism. We also discussed idealism and materialism, and realism, scientific realism, and particularly scientific realism, and nominalism for this lecture. And the beginning of social sciences, we just halted our journey to the beginning of social sciences, which will be discussed in the next lecture series. And we will meet again. I hope we will meet again, as I was speaking on the beginning of social sciences and scientific method very soon. Thank you for listening to my lecture. Let us stop sharing this and start video. Yes, it was a long lecture, I think. Yeah, it was streamed. It is streamed till now on the YouTube. Those who could not attend this lecture entirely can see it in the YouTube channel. So, is there any questions? I mean, YouTube comment box. Oh dear. YouTube comment box. Okay. Okay. Better platform. Good one, sir. If you have any question pertaining to the lecture, requesting host to unlock meeting. I was in Zoom due to internet issues. Not. I was.
Sir, there's a question, sir.
Yeah.
In Zoom, sir, how can visual objects are seen by our logical reasoning?
Visual objects are seen in our logical reasoning. Well, logical reasoning says that, well, everything, I mean, everything is innate. Everything that we see is innate. I mean, we're born with ideas. So whatever we see, we actually that's not the exact reflection of reality. We can I mean, realists actually say that, well, we can go we can come near to reality when we mix it with our logical reasoning. So some of you can really give the questions that are in YouTube also, because it's very difficult to give both YouTube and YouTube comments and the Shine of Samrat.
Hello, sir. There are some questions on YouTube also.
Can you tell the things for me?
Okay, sir. What is different between ontology and epistemology?
Well, epistemology, I mean, actually, I must say that, well, epistemology, ontology is part of epistemology. So difference, I mean, there is no such thing as difference. In ontology, we address the question of existence. And epistemology has an additional issue, that is how we acquire knowledge. Acquiring knowledge and the acquiring ideas about our existence, both are epistemological questions. But the second one is ontological question. Okay. Is there any other questions?
No, sir.
I will wait for a while to accept the questions. Ontology is basically study of being, and this is one basic epistemological question, and how we acquire the knowledge is the second epistemological question. And we have discussed how we acquire the knowledge, whether we acquire it with the with our reason, rational, or empirical observations. That's two related domains, which are known as epistemological questions. Yes. So I guess there are well, we had to, I mean, I must answer this question, why we locked this meeting after a while, because it's very disturbing when a person wants to enter into the room. There is a notification in front of my presentation. Each time before the notification, before the co-host can respond, it comes to my screen, and it creates some disturbance. That's why I actually live streamed it on YouTube, and so that once you get out of this meeting for whatever reason, maybe mostly for the internet connection, then well, you can also attend that. That's why I really told the co-hosts to lock the meeting. And you can always put questions here in the message box here, chat box here. Okay. So everyone is thanking me. It means that, well, I must call it a day. I would like to tell you that I'll be, as I said, that I will be lecturing on the beginning of social science and scientific method. The next set of lectures, I need a week or a couple of weeks of time to prepare myself. And I hope you will join those lectures. And I also appeal to all of you to please send a token amount of 100 rupees to the designated account on the relief work of Amphan storm. The entire Sundarbans has been devastated by this Amphan. Those of you already have sent the money. Please ignore the message. But many of you could not send it for various reasons. But I will appeal it to you. Please do that. We will either hand over to a very good NGO who works with that, works in that period, and if in the area, Sundarbans area, and if the amount is big enough, then we will personally go there and do some relief work. That's it. Thank you for attending the meeting or the lecture. We will meet again, I hope. Thank you.